When I bought the old, weathered ranch on the edge of the woods, I thought I was buying peace, 150 acres of quiet history. But the moment I moved in, a woman from the neighboring HOA claimed my land, belonged to the community. Within days, she filed an eviction notice for my own property. If you've ever had to stand up for what's right against greed, arrogance, or lies, make sure to subscribe, because this story proves that justice always finds its way home. The ranch was older than the paved roads that led to it. Its red barn leaned slightly to one side, and the wind carried the faint smell of pine and earth that hadn't been disturbed in decades. When I first saw it on a cloudy afternoon, something about the quiet hum of the place pulled me in. It wasn't just land, it was legacy. The agent told me the place had been sitting empty for nearly 20 years. No one wanted the upkeep, and the previous owners had passed away with no heirs. The property stretched wide, 150 acres of open fields, a few broken fences, and a crumbling main house that still whispered of the past. The price was almost too good to be true. What I didn't know then was that my dream purchase bordered one of the most notorious HOA communities in the county, Rosewood Meadows. Pristine lawns, identical mailboxes, and neighbors who measured self-worth in complaint letters. On the day I moved in, a storm gathered over the horizon. The sky turned a bruised shade of gray as my truck rattled up the gravel path. The air smelled of rain and old wood. I felt at peace, until I noticed a cluster of people standing at the edge of my property line, arms folded, watching. At the front of them stood her. A woman in a pressed white blouse, short hair perfectly styled, lips pursed in disapproval. She had the kind of presence that turned the air cold. That was Karen Whitaker, the self-appointed president of the Rosewood HOA. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood there, tapping a folder against her palm, waiting. By the time I unloaded the first box, she was already walking up the drive. The sound of her heels clicking against the gravel felt almost unnatural out here. Too clean, too deliberate. She stopped a few feet from my porch, looking around like she was inspecting a crime scene. "This land," she said, voice sharp and rehearsed, "has always been considered part of the Rosewood buffer zone. Community property." I stared at her, half amused, half stunned. "Ma'am, this ranch is over 150 years old. I bought it directly from the county records office. It's on a separate title." She smirked, like she'd heard a child explain algebra. "That's what you think." The rain started falling in slow, heavy drop. She didn't move. Her perfume mixed with the wet scent of dirt and pine, clashing horribly. She handed me a paper, a notice of encroachment. Apparently, the HOA claimed that my fence, which had stood for decades, extended into their community space. "Remove the fence or we'll pursue formal eviction," the notice read. It would have been laughable if not for how serious she looked, as if she owned the world and the rest of us were trespassing on it. I told her to leave. She didn't. She stood there under her umbrella, rain streaking her blouse, and said, "You'll regret fighting us. We protect what's ours." The storm rolled in full force that night. Thunder cracked over the valley, lightning illuminating the rolling hills behind the barn. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the land I now called mine, but something in my chest felt uneasy. The next morning, a community watch vehicle, a white SUV with Rosewood logos, was parked at the edge of my property. A man inside was taking pictures. By the third day, I received my first violation notice. Apparently, my barn's exterior condition didn't meet visual harmony standards with the HOA. It was absurd. They had no jurisdiction here. None. But the letters kept coming, printed, formal, and threatening. Then came the drone. It hovered over my house one afternoon, buzzing like an angry wasp. I waved my arms, yelled, even threw a handful of gravel, but it stayed there, steady, recording. That night, I heard something move outside near the barn. Footstep. When I went to check, I found one of my gates wide open, the one that led to the forest edge. And there, pinned to the post, was a laminated notice. Unauthorized structure within community limits. Must vacate within 72 hours. I felt my pulse throb in my ears. They were trespassing. They were testing me. I called the sheriff's department the next morning, and the deputy who showed up looked half exhausted. When I explained everything, he sighed. Rosewood's done this before, he said. They've pushed lines for years, literally. They think the HOA extends wherever they say it does. But technically, you're outside their jurisdiction. Technically. That word stuck with me. The deputy advised me to install cameras. He warned that these folks don't back down easy. Over the next week, I caught glimpses of them again. Karen's car, parked by the fence. A man in khakis measuring with a laser tool. The same drone, hovering. I started feeling like I was under siege. Every sunset, the wind seemed to carry whispers from the woods. Every creak in the old house made me tense. One night, I noticed movement near the barn again, a flashlight cutting through the dark. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and quietly stepped out. The light flickered off as I approached. But when I reached the barn, I found the lock broken. Inside, my tools were scattered, and carved into one of the wooden beams was a single word: leave. The sound of an engine roared to life in the distance. By the time I reached the road, the tail lights were disappearing into the fog. That was when I realized, this wasn't just harassment. This was war. And I had just become the one thing Karen Whitaker couldn't control, a man who didn't scare easily. The next morning, I made my decision. If they wanted to fight for this land, they were going to regret ever stepping on it. The morning after the break-in felt heavier than usual. The fog hung low over the fields, curling like smoke around the fence post. My coffee went cold in my hand as I stared at the carved word in the barn beam, leave. I'd grown up around men who taught me not to back down when someone threatened what was yours. And this ranch, old, creaking, and scarred by time, was mine now. I wasn't going anywhere. So, I installed motion cameras, changed every lock, and set up a few floodlights that could turn the entire property into daylight with a single switch. Still, something about Rosewood felt like a living thing. Like the HOA wasn't just a group of neighbors, it was a hive, and Karen was the queen. By midweek, the harassment ramped up. A letter from their attorney arrived in a thick white envelope. The HOA now claimed that the access road leading to my ranch was community-maintained, and therefore, they could restrict my use of it unless I complied with their visual harmony codes. They attached fines. Thousands of dollars in imaginary penalties. But the real blow came that Friday morning. I woke up to the sound of engines, 3 trucks idling near my fence line. Men in neon vests were unloading equipment. When I walked out, Karen was there too, holding a clipboard, her signature red lipstick cutting against the gray morning air. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked. She didn't even look at me. Per Rosewood's decision, we're removing non-compliant fencing and beginning buffer restoration. On my land. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's not yours anymore." The chainsaws roared to life. I grabbed my phone, started recording, and called the sheriff's office again. The dispatcher recognized my voice instantly. "Let me guess, Rosewood?" "Yes. They're cutting down my fence." She sighed. "Stay put. We'll send someone out." By the time the deputy arrived, 2 panels were already gone. Karen had that same smug confidence she always wore, as if she knew the law would bend for her. But this time, it didn't. The deputy, a different one from before, older, quieter, stepped out of his cruiser, hands resting on his belt. He listened to both sides, then said evenly, "Unless you've got a county permit or a court order, you're trespassing." Karen's smile faltered. "You can't be serious," she said. "This land has always been." He cut her off. "Doesn't matter what you think it's been. Legally, this property's outside Rosewood's jurisdiction. Pack it up." Her face turned crimson. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The men with the chainsaws hesitated, glancing between her and the deputy. Finally, she snapped her clipboard shut, spun on her heel, and stormed back to her SUV. The tires spat gravel as she sped off. That was the first real victory, but it didn't last. That night, the cameras caught something chilling. At exactly 2:17 a.m., headlights appeared near the barn. A person stepped out, their face hidden by a hoodie, and walked toward my fence with a canister in hand. The next frame showed flames. By the time I ran outside, the small pile of hay near the barn was already burning. The air filled with smoke, the dry wood crackling. I grabbed the hose and doused it before it spread, coughing, shaking, furious. The fire had been deliberate. There was no doubt. The next morning, I took the footage straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy reviewed it, jaw tightening. "We'll handle it," he said. "But you should know, folks in Rosewood have friends in places. They've caused problems for years." I asked what that meant. He didn't answer. The next few days blurred together in paranoia and exhaustion. Every car that slowed near the gate, every shadow past sunset, made my pulse quicken. Then came the letter that changed everything. It wasn't from the HOA this time. It was from the county assessor's office. Apparently, Rosewood had filed a community boundary review, claiming historical usage rights over a 10-acre section of my property, the part where my barn sat. They wanted it reclassified as shared space. In simpler terms, they were trying to steal my land legally. I called the assessor's office immediately. The woman on the phone was polite but hesitant. "Sir, Rosewood has influence. They've done this before. You'll need proof. Old maps, deeds, anything that shows this was separate land originally." Proof. That was the word that stuck. That night, I went digging through the house, searching through the old file cabinet that came with the property. Dust coated everything, and the drawers creaked open like they hadn't been touched in decades. In the bottom drawer, under yellowed papers and rusted staples, I found a folder labeled Original Title, 1874. The document inside was brittle but legible. It clearly stated that the land was granted independently, long before Rosewood ever existed. The boundaries were exact, the same ones still marked by my fences today. But that wasn't all. There was another note, handwritten, tucked behind the deed. "Beware the neighbors who forget where their fences end." I almost laughed at the irony. The next morning, I made copies and sent them straight to the county office and the sheriff's department. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had ground to stand on. Until the HOA meeting. It was Karen's idea, of course. She called it an open discussion on community land ethics. Flyers were taped to mailboxes and utility poles, even one pinned to my gate. I decided to show up. The Rosewood clubhouse was exactly what I expected: spotless, white walls, and a smell of disinfectant so strong it burned. When I walked in, the room went quiet. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, eyes that looked more curious than friendly. Karen stood at the front, microphone in hand, voice syrupy sweet. "Let's remember everyone," she said. "This is about unity. We simply want what's fair." Fair. That word twisted in my gut. She clicked a remote, and a projection appeared behind her, an old map. Only it wasn't my map. It was doctored, the borders redrawn to include my land as part of Rosewood. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen smiled at me like a cat that had cornered a bird. "Any objections?" she asked, pretending to be civil. I raised a hand, then held up my own document, the real deed, sealed and notarized. "This is the original title from 1874, I said. "You've been lying to everyone here." The room fell silent. Karen's face froze. For a long moment, no one moved. Then someone from the back muttered, "Is that real?" I didn't answer. I just laid the document on the table and turned to leave. But as I walked out, I heard Karen whisper to one of her board members, "He doesn't know what we've found." That sentence echoed in my head all the way home. What had they found? Because whatever it wasn't over. Not even close. 4 days I couldn't shake those words. "He doesn't know what we've found." They echoed in the back of my head every time I stepped outside, every time the wind rustled through the dry grass. What had they discovered? What could possibly give the HOA leverage over a ranch that had stood here for a century and a half? The next week was eerily quiet. Too quiet. No drones. No letters. No Karen. It felt wrong, like the calm before another storm. I spent the mornings working on the barn, trying to fix what the fire had damaged. But one afternoon, as I was hammering a plank back into place, I noticed something odd. A patch of earth near the far end of the barn floor was sunken, the wood above it slightly warped, as if something beneath had collapsed. At first, I thought it was just old age. The barn was nearly as old as the land itself. But when I pried up one of the boards, I saw a faint glint of metal underneath. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a shovel. After 10 minutes of digging, the shovel hit something hard, a rusted iron hatch. The kind you'd find on storm shelters or cellars. It was bolted shut, but the hinges were old. I wedged the shovel under and pried until the seal gave with a metallic groan. A wave of cool, musty air spilled out. Beneath the hatch was a wooden staircase, swallowed by darkness. For a moment I just stood there, the wind howling through the barn's broken window, carrying a faint scent of earth and something else, old oil maybe. Then I descended. The steps creaked under my weight, dust swirling in the beam of my flashlight. The air grew colder as I went down, until I reached a small underground room. The walls were lined with shelves stacked with rusted tools, mason jars, and boxes eaten by time. But on the far wall was something that didn't belong, a metal lockbox still sealed. It took me a few minutes to pry it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were papers, dozens of them. Most were deeds, letters, and receipts from the late 1800s, evidence of the original owner's business. But at the bottom, I found something that made my pulse quicken. A hand-drawn map. It showed my ranch, Rosewood's land, and the surrounding hills. But there was a red X marked under the area where the HOA now stood. Next to it, in faded ink, someone had written, Coal Reserve, disputed 1889. My mind raced. This wasn't about boundaries or fences. It was about resources. The HOA wasn't just trying to steal land. They were after whatever lay buried underneath it. That night, I scanned the documents, sent copies to my lawyer, and hid the originals in a safe. Then I started digging into county archives online. It took hours, but eventually I found it, an old lawsuit from 1890 between two families. One owned this ranch. The other? The same land Rosewood now occupies. The dispute was over mineral rights, coal, specifically, but the case was dismissed when the mine collapsed, supposedly killing several workers. The site was sealed off, forgotten. Until now. The next morning, I drove into town and asked to see the geological record. The clerk hesitated, then admitted that Rosewood's board had already requested those same files a week earlier. So that's what Karen meant. They'd found the mine. And if the coal vein extended under my land, which it likely did, it would explain why they were desperate to claim ownership. By the time I returned home, a sleek black SUV was parked outside my gate. Karen was waiting. Her sunglasses reflected the bright afternoon sun, her expression unreadable. "You've been busy," she said. I didn't answer. She smiled faintly, stepping closer. "We know what's under this land. You could have told us sooner. We might have made this cooperative." Her tone sent a chill through me. "You mean the mine?" She tilted her head. "You shouldn't talk about things you don't understand. There are contracts at stake now." Contract. That word made my stomach turn. "I'm not selling," I said. She didn't argue. She just looked past me toward the barn. "You should be careful where you dig. Some things are better left buried." Then she left, her SUV kicking up a storm of dust down the dirt road. That night I reviewed the footage from my cameras again, and froze. At 3:06 a.m., 3 figures were walking toward the barn. They wore dark clothing, carrying flashlights. One of them was unmistakably Karen. Her short hair and rigid posture gave her away even in the dark. They went straight to the hatch. The footage ended there. When I ran out to check, the hatch was still sealed, but there were fresh footprints in the dirt and a faint smell of gasoline. They'd been inside. Or at least, they'd tried. I stayed awake the rest of the night, shotgun by the door, waiting. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. It was time to expose them. I took the documents and footage to a local reporter, a woman named Lacey who ran an independent online paper. She listened carefully, brows knitting together as she read the old deed and looked through the video stills. "This is big," she said. "If they're hiding an unregistered mine under residential property, that's a violation of at least 5 state laws." She promised to dig deeper and publish the story once she confirmed the record. But later that evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun set behind the hills, I noticed something new. The Community Watch SUV was back. Only this time, it was parked on my driveway. A man I didn't recognize stepped out, holding a folder. "I'm here to deliver notice," he said flatly, handing it over. It was an injunction, filed by Rosewood's legal team, demanding immediate cessation of unauthorized excavation. I laughed under my breath. They were accusing me of trespassing on my own land. But at the bottom of the letter, one line stood out. "Violation of this order may result in forfeiture of property due to historical claim reassessment." It wasn't a bluff. They were trying to take the ranch, officially. As I looked up, the man was already walking back to his SUV. But before he got in, he turned and said quietly, "She's not going to stop until you do." Then he drove off, leaving a trail of dust and the faint sound of thunder rolling over the hills. The storm was coming again, but this time it wasn't in the sky. This was the fight of a lifetime. And I wasn't backing down. The next morning, the sky was an iron gray, and the air felt charged, heavy, expectant, like something was about to break. I stood on the porch staring at the fence line, the folded injunction in my hand, my stomach twisted in a quiet, simmering rage. They weren't just playing games anymore. The HOA, under Karen's leadership, was making a full legal move to take the land. That piece of paper was their declaration of war. I spent the morning making calls. County offices, my lawyer, even the local news desk. Most were hesitant, some even evasive. Rosewood had money and, more importantly, influence. They donated to campaigns, through fundraisers, sponsored schools. Their hands were in everything. But I had something they didn't, the truth. My lawyer, an older man named Jensen, was calm but blunt. "They can't claim forfeiture without proving ownership. The historical documents you found are your shield. Keep them safe, and don't sign a single thing they send you." I promised I wouldn't. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing behind closed doors. That evening, the sound of engines cut through the quiet. I stepped outside to see 3 Rosewood security vehicles parked along the road. The men inside weren't uniformed police. They were private hires. Big, broad-shouldered, standing in the rain with radios clipped to their collars. When I shouted at them to leave, they didn't respond. They just stood there watching. By nightfall, they were gone, but in their place, a new sign had appeared at the edge of my property. "Community boundary. No unauthorized access." They were rewriting history one signpost at a time. That night, the rain fell hard, slapping against the windows, drumming on the tin roof. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I noticed movement near the barn. Lights bobbing, figures shifting in the storm. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out, boots sinking in the mud. There were 3 of them. One near the gate, one by the barn, and one kneeling by the hatch, again. When my light hit them, they scattered. One dropped something, a crowbar, before vanishing into the treeline. I stood there in the downpour, soaked to the bone, heart pounding. The hatch was dented, the locks twisted. They'd tried to break in again. I called the sheriff's office, but the dispatcher sounded tired, almost reluctant. "Sir, we'll send someone out in the morning. It's just a property dispute. Don't engage with them. Just a property dispute." I realized then how deep Rosewood's reach really went. They weren't just neighbors. They were an empire of entitlement, and the system bent around them. By sunrise, I was done waiting for help. I printed every deed, every photo, every map, and mailed copies to half the county, news outlets, state offices, even the Environmental Board. If they wanted to take this land, they'd have to do it under a spotlight. But Rosewood struck back faster than I expected. 2 days later, I received a notice from the county court. An emergency hearing had been scheduled. Rosewood's petition claimed I was unlawfully obstructing community property exploration. They'd even attached photos of the mine entrance, the same hatch under my barn, claiming it was part of their heritage site. The hearing was set for Friday. The days leading up to it were tense. Karen stopped pretending to be polite. She'd drive past slowly in her white Lexus, eyes cold, a faint smile on her lip. Once, I caught her taking pictures from the road. But she underestimated me. On Thursday night, a storm rolled through again, fierce thunder splitting the sky, rain hammering against the land. Around midnight, lightning struck near the treeline, briefly illuminating something. Movement. I saw them again. 3 figures, heading toward the barn. This time I didn't shout. I grabbed my camera and recorded every second. They reached the hatch, used bolt cutters, and pried it open. One climbed down while the others kept watch. Then, silence. A moment later, a deep, echoing crack sounded from beneath the ground. The 2 men outside jumped back, panicked. The earth trembled slightly under my feet. One of them shouted something I couldn't hear, then they both ran. The tremor faded, but my gut told me something had gone wrong underground. By morning, I went to check. The hatch was wide open. The air that rose from below smelled of dust and something sharp. Sulfur, maybe. The wooden stairs were splintered, and about 10 feet down, the passage had collapsed inward. Whoever went down there hadn't come back up. I called it in anonymously. By noon, the sheriff's office and fire department were crawling over the site. They sealed off the barn, roped off the area, and started digging carefully. When they pulled the first body out, one of the men from last night, Karen arrived in her car, pale and silent. She didn't speak to me. She didn't even look my way. The deputy told me the collapse had reopened part of an old mine shaft, one that hadn't been mapped in over 100 years. They found coal fragments and signs of gas seepage, dangerously unstable. "Lucky you didn't go down there," the deputy said. "It could have taken the whole barn." That night, I watched the news. The local station ran the story: unauthorized mine found beneath Rosewood HOA land. The images showed crews blocking off parts of Rosewood, warning of potential sinkholes. The headline didn't mention me, but the damage was done. Karen's empire began to crack. By Friday's hearing, she looked different, tired, brittle, but still defiant. She accused me of falsifying deeds, trespassing, and endangering the community. But when my lawyer presented the old documents, notarized, historical, and irrefutable, the judge leaned back, unimpressed. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "this property has been independently owned for 151 years. The HOA's claims are unfounded." Her mouth fell open slightly. The sound of whispers rippled through the courtroom. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, your organization's actions, including unauthorized trespass and damage, will be referred to the county prosecutor." For the first time, Karen didn't have words. When it was over, I stepped outside into the sunlight. The air smelled clean, like rain had finally washed something foul away. Karen stood by her car, staring at me. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. "This isn't finished," she said quietly. "You've dug up things you shouldn't have." Then she got in her car and drove off, tires spitting gravel. I watched her go, that uneasy feeling returning once more. Because deep down, I knew she was right about one thing. Something about that mine still didn't add up. And if she was scared, maybe I should be too. The morning after the court hearing, I thought it was finally over. The HOA had been humiliated, their lies exposed, and Karen, for once, silenced. The air over the ranch felt lighter. For the first time in months, I slept without keeping one eye on the cameras. But peace, I've learned, is fragile. Especially when people like Karen are involved. It started with a sound, a low, rumbling hum coming from beneath the barn. I heard it late that night while sitting on the porch. At first, I thought it was a distant truck on the county road. But it didn't fade. It grew louder, rhythmic, almost mechanical. By morning, the noise had stopped. But near the barn, I noticed the ground had sunk slightly, another soft depression in the dirt. I called the sheriff's office, and they said the county geologist was already investigating potential sinkholes after the collapse. They'd be sending someone out to inspect. When the inspector arrived, he was a quiet man in his 50s with a kind of cautious professionalism. He walked the property, took soil readings, and finally crouched near the hatch. "It's not just a mine," he said. "There's a system of tunnels under this land, maybe miles long." "Tunnels?" He nodded. "Could have been old ventilation shafts or storage route. But they're unstable. You'll want to stay clear." He promised to file a report. But the way his eyes flicked toward the direction of Rosewood made me wonder if he already suspected something else. That night, my cameras caught something again. Movement near the tree line, lights flickering deep in the woods. I zoomed in on the footage later. A small group of people, flashlights sweeping the ground, carrying what looked like excavation tools. Rosewood wasn't done digging. The next day, I drove into town to confront Karen directly. Her Lexus was parked in front of the Rosewood HOA office, a pristine white building that looked more like a law firm than a neighborhood office. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and printer ink. She was there, standing by the front desk, speaking to a man in a tailored suit. When she saw me, she froze. The color drained slightly from her face, but she recovered fast. "Mr. Hale," she said evenly, "I hope you're here to make peace." "Peace," I said. "You've been trespassing, burning, lying, and now you're digging again. What are you really after, Karen?" The man beside her adjusted his glasses. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" I stared at him. "Who are you?" "Corporate counsel," he said. "Rosewood has interests in the land's subsurface rights. We're pursuing verification." "Subsurface rights?" I repeated, incredulous. Karen smiled thinly. "The coal, Mr. Hale. The courts don't rule on mineral rights easily. And we have evidence those tunnels extend into our territory, and yours. So you plan to mine under both properties?" Her eyes glittered. "We plan to own what's beneath them." I left before I said something that would get me arrested. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't bluffing. I started reviewing old maps again, overlaying them with the tunnel schematics from the county archive. That's when I noticed something strange. A sealed section that stretched directly beneath Rosewood's community center. I went out to the barn, flashlight in hand, and stared at the hatch. It had been resealed by the county after the collapse, but a thought nagged at me. If those tunnels connected both properties, there might be an entrance on their side too. I needed proof. At dawn, I parked a mile away from Rosewood and walked the back trail through the wood. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of wet leaves. When I reached the edge of the subdivision, I could see the maintenance sheds behind their clubhouse, and something new, a fenced-off area with a sign that read, "Under construction, authorized personnel only." There were tire tracks, fresh dirt piles, and the faint sound of drilling. They were already down there. I recorded everything, video, photos, timestamps, then slipped away before anyone noticed. That night, I sent the evidence to Lacey, the reporter who had helped me earlier. She called almost immediately. "This is huge," she said. "If they're mining illegally, the Environmental Board will come down on them hard." But before she could publish, the story vanished. Her website went offline. Her social media accounts deleted. Calls went unanswered. When I drove to her office the next morning, the building was locked, the windows covered. Gone. That's when the messages started. Handwritten notes slipped under my gate. "Stop digging. You're not safe. Leave before it's too late. Each one unsigned. I stopped sleeping again. Every night, I sat by the window with the shotgun beside me, watching. Waiting. 2 days later, the earth shook. It was a deep, muffled boom that rattled the windows and sent birds scattering from the trees. I ran outside, heart pounding. The sound had come from the direction of Rosewood. Dust rose over the rooftops, thick, gray, spreading like smoke. By noon, emergency sirens filled the valley. When I drove closer, I saw the damage. A massive sinkhole had opened near the Rosewood Community Center, swallowing part of the road and a row of mailboxes. Several houses nearby had cracked foundations. The air smelled of gas and earth. News crews arrived quickly this time. And the truth came with them. The blast had been caused by illegal excavation, unreported drilling equipment, unstable tunnels. The HOA's contractors had triggered a partial collapse of the old mine system. Within hours, the headlines were everywhere. Rosewood HOA under investigation for illegal mining. Karen's empire crumbled overnight. Board members resigned. Lawsuits stacked up. The county condemned the area around the sinkhole. And yet, amid all the chaos, one thing haunted me, those words Karen had said after the hearing. "You've dug up things you shouldn't have." Because when I visited the edge of the sinkhole days later, peering down into the fractured earth, I saw something buried in the exposed wall of rock. Something metallic, half unearthed, glinting in the afternoon sun. It wasn't coal. It wasn't machinery. It was something else. A door. Old, iron, bolted shut and built deep into the earth, exactly beneath the line dividing my ranch and Rosewood. And carved into its surface, almost erased by time, were words barely visible under the dust. "Do not open." My stomach turned cold. The mine wasn't just a mine. It was hiding something. Something they'd tried and failed to keep buried. And if that door had survived the collapse, maybe it wasn't meant to be opened at all. The day the sinkhole opened, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. The HOA had imploded, Karen's power had shattered, and Rosewood's manicured lawns were now edged by yellow caution tape. But that door, rusted, ancient, and buried in stone, haunted me like a whisper in the dark. I couldn't shake it. Even after the authorities sealed off the site and declared it unsafe, I found myself driving to the edge every evening, standing behind the fence, staring into the hollow earth. The door sat crooked in the fractured wall, half swallowed by rock. No one seemed to notice it, or maybe they just didn't want to. A week later, Karen vanished. Her house was empty, the Lexus gone, her phone disconnected. The local paper said she'd left town after the scandal, but the sheriff quietly told me something different. Her car had been found abandoned near the old mining road. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just gone. And something else, a set of heavy tire marks, leading toward the condemned zone. I knew where she'd gone. That night, I grabbed my flashlight, rope, and camera, and drove out to the edge of the sinkhole. The police tape fluttered in the cold wind. Clouds rolled across the moon, cutting the light to a dull gray. The air was still, but the ground seemed to hum, faintly, like it was remembering. I climbed down slowly, using the jagged rocks as footholds. Each breath echoed. Dust trickled from the walls, and somewhere deep below, I could hear the faint drip of water. When I reached the ledge near the door, I saw fresh footprints in the mud. Smaller than mine. Recent. The door loomed before me, iron and riveted, the words, "Do not open," carved deep but worn thin. The metal smelled of oil and old earth. Someone had been trying to unbolt it. The rust around the hinges was disturbed. And lying nearby, half buried in dirt, was a broken crowbar. I knelt down and touched the handle. Still warm. Karen had been here. I called out her name, but my voice just bounced off the stone, swallowed by the hollow space below. I turned my flashlight toward the seams of the door, and froze. Something was moving behind it. Not a shadow, a shape. Slow, deliberate, like something pressing against the metal from the other side. The sound that followed was deep, metallic, a groan that vibrated through my chest. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The air felt heavy, charged like before a storm. I took a step toward the ladder, ready to climb out, when I noticed something else. A torn scrap of fabric caught on a bolt, bright red. Karen's jacket. My throat tightened. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get out. But curiosity, or maybe fear, rooted me in place. I turned back to the door, light trembling in my hand. The metal was bulging outward, just slightly, as if something was breathing beneath it. And then it stopped. Silence. The hum faded. The air stilled. I backed away slowly, climbed up the rocks, and didn't stop until I reached the fence. When I looked back one last time, the door was still visible, but now faintly glowing around the edges, a dull orange light bleeding through the cracks. By morning, the county had extended the restricted zone. No one was allowed within 500 feet of the sinkhole. Heavy machinery moved in, covering the area with steel plates and gravel. The door, whatever it was buried again. But the strange thing was this. Every night after that, the ground trembled slightly around my ranch. Just enough to make the glass rattle. And sometimes, when the wind was right, I could hear it again, that hum, that low, pulsing vibration, rising from the earth like something deep beneath was trying to wake. The official reports came weeks later. The tunnels were sealed. The HOA was dissolved. My ranch was declared safe. But safe didn't feel right. I kept thinking about Karen, her obsession, her greed, her disappearance. Maybe she'd found what she was looking for under that door. Maybe the land had finally taken back what it was owed. Still, I couldn't move on. I started going through her old property records, court filings, anything public I could find. That's when I discovered something chilling. Rosewood's founding documents listed not just homeowners, but original site partners. Among them was a company name I'd never seen before. The Anderton Coal Syndicate, 1872. And the property description attached to that record matched my ranch perfectly. There it was in black and white. Primary shaft access, secured under Section 9, Anderton site. The door wasn't a mine gate. It was a containment door. They hadn't dug for coal. They'd sealed something in. No wonder Karen called it community property. No wonder the HOA kept expanding. They'd inherited a secret one they couldn't control. Weeks passed. Life returned to a kind of uneasy normal. The county filled the sinkhole. The story faded from the news, and the new HOA board, what little remained of it, sent me a formal apology letter, as if that could erase everything. But I still see it sometimes, the faint glow through the dirt when the moon is low. And sometimes, just before dawn, when the mist rolls in from the fields, I catch a glimpse of something moving where the sinkhole used to be. A figure, red jacket fluttering, standing still. Watching. Karen? Or what was left of her? The hum never stopped. It just went deeper. And every time it rises again, I can feel it shaking through the floorboards of the old ranch, a reminder that some things buried aren't meant to be unearthed. The HOA tried to own the land. They thought they could control its secret. But the earth remembers. And now, it's remembering me.